My name is Luz Ramirez, and at 32 years old, I never expected to be sitting in a lawyer's office fighting for my inheritance, while still processing the grief of losing my father. The numbness I felt as I stared at my stepmother Veronica across the polished oak table was indescribable. Her red lips curved into a smile that made my stomach turn. For 15 years, she had methodically worked to wedge herself between my father and me, and now, with Dad gone, that smug expression told me she thought she had won. I should have known something was wrong when she stood up, smoothed her designer black dress, and cleared her throat to make her announcement. Before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how my father had the last laugh even from beyond the grave. To understand the magnitude of what happened in that lawyer's office, you need to know about my father, Harold Ramirez. Dad built his real estate empire from nothing, starting with a single fixer-upper in a rough neighborhood, and eventually growing to own one of the most successful property development companies in the state. He was brilliant, hardworking, and genuinely cared about creating homes people would love for generations. His success never changed him, though. He still fixed things around the house himself, insisted on mowing our lawn every Sunday, and taught me how to change a tire before I could even drive. My childhood was everything a kid could dream of. Mom Laura was a high school art teacher who filled our home with color and creativity. She balanced Dad's practical nature perfectly. They were that rare couple who still held hands after 20 years of marriage, who still made each other laugh until they cried. Our home was always warm, always full of music and delicious food, and friends stopping by just because they wanted to be around us. When I was 17, everything changed. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, and within 6 months she was gone. It was like someone had sucked all the color and music out of our lives. Dad and I were both drowning in grief, barely keeping each other afloat. I still remember the nights I would hear him crying in their bedroom, and how in the morning he would put on a brave face for me, making sure I ate breakfast before school. Just over a year after Mom died, Dad met Veronica at a charity gala. She was 20 years his junior, breathtakingly beautiful, with long black hair and deep brown eyes that seemed to see right through you. She worked for the charity, organizing donors and events. I will never forget the first time Dad brought her home for dinner. She brought me an expensive bracelet and complimented everything about our house, asking questions about Mom's art on the walls with what seemed like genuine interest. At first, I was happy for Dad. The light had returned to his eyes and he smiled more often. When he announced they were getting married after dating for only 4 months, I swallowed my concerns. It felt too soon, too rushed, but who was I to stand in the way of his happiness? I was heading to college soon anyway, and the thought of him being alone in that big house haunted me. The wedding was small but lavish. I stood beside Dad as his best woman, forcing a smile as Veronica glided down the aisle in a gown that cost more than a semester of my college tuition. Something changed almost immediately after they returned from their honeymoon in Italy. Veronica began redecorating our house, removing Mom's paintings one by one, replacing them with modern impersonal art. When I objected, she smiled tightly and said, "Your father and I want a fresh start, Luz. Surely you can understand that." Dad seemed oblivious to the tension between us at first. He was working more than ever, expanding the business into commercial properties, while Veronica took over management of their social calendar. Sunday dinners became elaborate affairs with Dad's business associates, rather than our close friends. Veronica would showcase her gourmet cooking skills and designer outfits, while I sat awkwardly in clothes that never seemed quite fancy enough. By the time I left for college, Veronica had established herself as the lady of the house. My childhood bedroom was converted into her meditation space within weeks. When I came home for holidays, I stayed in the guest room surrounded by furniture I didn't recognize. Veronica's tactics became more transparent over time. She would forget to tell me about family gatherings until the last minute. "Oh, Luz, didn't I tell you we were having the Wilsons over tonight? Your father was so disappointed you couldn't make it." She would casually mention to Dad how I never called or visited enough, while simultaneously forgetting to pass along my messages to him. Dad sent me money regularly through college and into my early career as a marketing executive. Whenever we spoke on the phone, he seemed distracted, often mentioning he couldn't talk long because Veronica had planned something. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. The dad who once spent hours helping me with science projects now barely had 15 minutes to catch up on my life. I tried to maintain our connection, sending him updates about my work, flying home whenever I could, despite the increasingly chilly welcome from Veronica. She would make comments about my appearance, my career choices, my lack of a serious relationship, all with a sugary smile that didn't reach her eyes. Luz, darling. That outfit is so practical. I guess that's appropriate for someone in your position. Or, still single. At your age, I was already married to your father. Some women just aren't meant for marriage, I suppose. Dad would occasionally defend me, but weakly, clearly wanting to avoid conflict. Veronica means well, sweetheart, he would say when we had rare moments alone. She just wants the best for you. But I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he changed the subject whenever conversation veered too close to any disagreement between his wife and daughter. As years passed, our relationship became increasingly distant. He missed my college graduation because Veronica had planned a surprise anniversary trip. He forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, then overcompensated with expensive gifts that felt like they were chosen by his assistant. The father who knew every detail of my life, from my favorite ice cream flavor to the names of all my friends, slowly disappeared, replaced by a man who seemed perpetually apologetic and increasingly absent. When I was 28, I landed a job with an international marketing firm that required extensive travel. In some ways, it was a relief. The visits home became even less frequent, reduced to major holidays where Veronica would parade me in front of their friends like evidence of what a wonderful stepmother she was. "We're so close," she would say, arm around my shoulders, fingers digging in just enough to warn me not to contradict her. Luz is like the daughter I never had. Meanwhile, I built my own life, made my own family of close friends, and tried to accept that the relationship with my father would never be what it once was. I told myself it was normal that adult children drift from their parents, that at least he was happy with Veronica. But deep down, I mourned the loss of the man who had been my hero, my rock, my dad. I was in Tokyo closing a major marketing deal for an international client when I got the call that would change everything. It was 3 a.m, and the unfamiliar number jolted me from sleep. An old family friend, Thomas, was on the line, his voice breaking as he delivered the news no child ever wants to hear. "Luz, I am so sorry to tell you this, but your father passed away last night. Massive heart attack. It was sudden. The doctors said he likely didn't suffer." The words hit me like physical blows. Dad. Gone. Just like that. No chance to say goodbye, no final words, no closure. The guilt crashed over me in waves as I realized I hadn't spoken to him in over 2 months. 2 months of silence that I could never take back. "Does Veronica know you're calling me?" I asked already, knowing the answer. Thomas hesitated. "Not exactly. She asked me to handle some arrangements, and I thought you should hear it from someone who cares about you. That told me everything I needed to know." Veronica hadn't even planned to inform me of my own father's death. I booked the first flight out of Tokyo, canceling meetings and deadlines without a second thought. 16 hours on a plane with nothing but my grief and regret for company. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from Veronica, some details about the funeral, anything. My inbox remained empty except for condolence messages from Thomas and a few family friends who had always stayed loyal despite Veronica's influence. When I finally arrived at my childhood home, exhausted and heartbroken, Veronica greeted me with an air kiss and perfectly rehearsed sympathy. She was impeccably dressed in designer black, not a hair out of place, not a trace of redness around her eyes. "Luz, darling, what a long journey you've had. You look absolutely dreadful. There's a guest room made up for you upstairs. The funeral is tomorrow at 11. I've handled everything, of course. No hug, no shared grief. No, I'm sorry for your loss, or he loved you so much. Just logistics and a thinly veiled criticism of my appearance after 20 hours of travel and devastation." The house was filled with flower arrangements and catering preparations. Veronica had transformed my childhood home into a reception venue with alarming efficiency. Mom's remaining photographs had been replaced with large, formal portraits of Veronica and Dad from their wedding and various social events. It was as if my mother and by extension my entire childhood had been erased. I barely slept that night, lying in an impersonal guest room surrounded by tasteful but cold decor that held no traces of the home I grew up in. I kept expecting Dad to knock on the door, to sit on the edge of my bed as he had when I was a child, to tell me everything would be okay. The silence was deafening. The funeral was a production that seemed designed to showcase Veronica's grief rather than celebrate Dad's life. She had selected a massive church Dad had never attended, invited hundreds of business associates he barely knew, and arranged for a string quartet to play music he would have hated. I sat in the front row next to her, feeling like an afterthought in the commemoration of my own father's life. When it came time for eulogies, Veronica spoke first, a tearful performance about their perfect marriage and how she had made his final years the happiest of his life. She didn't mention me once. When it was my turn to speak, I could barely form words through my grief, sharing disjointed memories of the father I had known before Veronica, the man who taught me to ride a bike and build birdhouses and navigate by the stars. I felt her eyes boring into me the entire time, silently judging every word, every tear. After the service, during the reception at the house, I tried to find comfort in reconnecting with old family friends. Many embraced me warmly, sharing stories about Dad that Veronica wouldn't have known. I noticed her watching these interactions from across the room, her smile tightening each time someone spent too long talking with me. When the last guests had left, I asked Veronica if I could have a few of Dad's personal items, his watch perhaps, or the fishing tackle box we had used on our trips to the lake. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," she said, voice dripping with false regret. "Everything belongs to me now, and I've already made arrangements for his personal effects. The watch is being appraised for insurance purposes, and I've donated those old fishing things. They were just collecting dust." I felt like I had been slapped. She had already disposed of his belongings, erasing more pieces of my father from the world without a thought for what they might mean to me. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "Those things meant something to us, to Dad and me." "I had every right," she snapped, dropping the grieving widow act for a moment. "I was his wife. I made him happy when you were too busy with your career to visit or call. Don't pretend you care about his things when you barely cared about him." Her words cut deep because they played into my worst fears, my deepest guilt. Had I abandoned Dad? Had I given up too easily, in the face of Veronica's manipulations? As I stood there fighting back tears, Thomas approached us. He had been Dad's friend for over 30 years, long before Veronica entered the picture. "Luz, I need to speak with you privately," he said, ignoring Veronica's obvious displeasure. He led me to Dad's study, one room that seemed untouched by Veronica's redecorating frenzy. It still smelled like him, like leather, and the subtle cologne he had worn for as long as I could remember. Thomas closed the door and handed me an envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to him. He gave it to me about 6 months ago." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in Dad's familiar handwriting, slightly shakier than I remembered. "My dearest Luz," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I never found the courage to say these things to you in person. I've made many mistakes in my life, but none greater than allowing distance to grow between us. Veronica and I, things haven't been what they seemed. I stayed for complicated reasons, but my love for you never wavered even when I failed to show it. Trust Daniel, my love. He has all the information, all the proof. I've prepared everything. Don't give up the fight. Know that I am so proud of the woman you've become, and that I have loved you every second of every day since you came into this world. All my love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. Daniel was Dad's longtime attorney, the man who would be reading the will in a week's time. What fight was Dad talking about? What had he prepared? When I looked up, Thomas was watching me with sad eyes. "Your father changed in the last few years," he said quietly. He seemed resigned. But these past 6 months, something was different. He was making calls, having secret meetings. I think he was trying to fix something before it was too late. Fix what I asked? Thomas shook his head. I don't know exactly. But he was worried about you, about what would happen to you after he was gone. He didn't trust Veronica. Not at the end. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my pocket like the treasure it was. Thank you for giving me this. It means more than you know. As I left the study, I saw Veronica watching from the hallway, eyes narrowed with suspicion. What was that about? She demanded. Just sharing memories, I lied, suddenly understanding that whatever Dad had been planning, Veronica couldn't know about it. Not yet. The week between the funeral and the reading of the will was excruciating. I extended my leave from work and stayed at a hotel nearby, unwilling to accept Veronica's coldly offered guest room for another night. I visited Dad's favorite places, the park where we used to fly kites, the diner where he always ordered the same breakfast for 30 years, the community center where he had volunteered teaching woodworking to kids. Each location held ghosts of happier times, memories that both comforted and devastated me. Veronica made sure I knew exactly what to expect at the will reading. She called daily, her voice syrupy with fake concern. I just want you to be prepared, Luz, she said the night before. We were scheduled to meet with Daniel. Your father left everything to me, of course. The house, the company, all the accounts. He knew I would manage his legacy properly. How do you know what's in the will? I asked, suspicion growing. Harold and I discussed everything, she replied smoothly. We had no secrets. Unlike the relationship he had with you, each conversation was designed to wound, to make me doubt the letter in my possession and the father I thought I knew. I reread his words nightly, clinging to them like a lifeline. Trust Daniel. Don't give up the fight. I had to believe Dad had a plan, that the letter wasn't just the wishful thinking of a guilty father. On the morning of the will reading, I arrived at Daniel's office 20 minutes early, hoping for a chance to speak with him privately before Veronica appeared. The receptionist informed me that Daniel was tied up in another meeting but would be with us shortly. I sat in the waiting room, smoothing my black dress nervously, watching the door. Veronica arrived exactly on time, naturally followed by a small entourage of her family members. I barely knew cousins and a sister who had never bothered to build any relationship with me, but suddenly appeared interested in my father's estate. They clustered around Veronica like ladies in waiting, shooting curious glances my way, whispering behind manicured hands. Luz, darling, Veronica called across the waiting room loud enough for everyone to hear. I was just telling my sister how brave you are showing up today, when we all know how your father felt about your abandonment. Some people might have been too ashamed. Her family members nodded sympathetically, their expressions a practiced blend of pity and judgment. I gripped my purse tighter, feeling ganged up on and isolated. These people knew nothing about my relationship with Dad, yet they had already decided I was the villain in Veronica's carefully constructed narrative. When we were finally ushered into the conference room, Veronica made a show of selecting the chair at the head of the table, arranging her family members around her like a protective barrier. I sat alone on the opposite side, acutely aware of the physical divide that mirrored the emotional one. The conference room was imposing, with dark wood paneling and leather chairs that seemed designed to intimidate. Family photos of the law partners lined the walls, generations of success and stability that made my own fractured family situation feel even more painful by comparison. Daniel is running a bit late, his assistant informed us apologetically. He needed to retrieve some important documents related to Mr. Ramirez's estate. He asks for your patience. Veronica immediately began complaining, checking her expensive watch with dramatic sighs. This is completely unprofessional. I have appointments this afternoon. Harold's estate is straightforward. This shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. Her sister patted her hand consolingly. You've been through so much, Veronica. The least they could do is respect your time. I remained silent, watching them perform their little play of indignation. I noticed that despite her complaints about the delay, Veronica seemed nervous, repeatedly touching her hair, adjusting her jewelry, glancing at the door. What was she afraid of? Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Daniel entered the room. He was a tall man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been Dad's attorney for decades, handling both his business and personal legal matters. I had met him several times as a child, but hadn't seen him in years. "My sincere apologies for the delay," he said, placing a leather portfolio on the table. "I needed to ensure all the documents were in order. This is a more complex situation than some of you might be aware." His eyes met mine briefly, and I felt a surge of hope. Was this what Dad had meant? Had Daniel been part of whatever plan my father had put in place? "Let's not waste any more time," Veronica said sharply. "We all know why we're here." Daniel nodded, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table from Veronica. "Indeed. We are here to discuss the last will and testament of Harold James Ramirez." He opened his portfolio and adjusted his glasses. "Before I begin the formal reading, are there any questions?" Before I could speak, Veronica stood up, suddenly smoothing her black dress with manicured hands. Her expression was a perfect blend of grief and dignity, clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Actually, I believe there's something that should be addressed before we proceed," she announced, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the room. "As Harold's wife of 15 years, I feel it's my duty to prepare everyone for what they're about to hear." Daniel frowned slightly but gestured for her to continue. Her family members exchanged knowing glances, clearly prepared for whatever was coming. Harold made a significant change to his will approximately 3 months before his untimely passing. Veronica continued, reaching into her designer handbag. "He and I discussed it at length. He was deeply hurt by certain parties' lack of attention and care during his final years." Her eyes fixed on me, making it abundantly clear who she meant. My stomach clenched with dread as she withdrew a document from her bag. In this amendment, Harold specifically removed Luz from his will entirely. Her voice dripped with satisfaction as shocked murmurs rippled through her family members. He felt that someone who couldn't make time for him in life didn't deserve to benefit from his death. I tried to change his mind, of course being the compassionate person I am, but Harold was quite adamant. She placed the document on the table and slid it toward Daniel, her eyes never leaving my face, clearly savoring my shock and pain. "I thought it would be kinder to address this now, rather than have poor Luz hear it during the formal reading. No one should be blindsided by such news." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Veronica's family looked at me with a mixture of pity and smug satisfaction. I felt sick, dizzy with disbelief. Could Dad really have cut me out completely? Had his letter been nothing but empty words? Or was Veronica lying, presenting a forged document to pressure me into giving up before the real will was read? I looked to Daniel, desperately searching his face for some hint, some reassurance that my father hadn't betrayed me so completely. Daniel picked up the document Veronica had presented, examining it with professional detachment. The silence in the room was suffocating as everyone waited for his verdict. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "This appears to be an amendment to Harold's will," Daniel confirmed, and my heart sank. "Dated February 15th of this year, approximately 3 months before his passing." Veronica's smile widened, triumph gleaming in her eyes. Harold was very clear about his wishes. He felt that Luz had abandoned him during his time of need, choosing her career over family. As painful as it is to say, he wanted to make a statement with his final wishes. Her family members nodded solemnly as if they had any right to judge the relationship between me and my father. I felt tears threatening, but refused to give Veronica the satisfaction of seeing me break down. "Is this real?" I asked Daniel directly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did my father really do this?" Daniel looked at me over his glasses, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. A small chuckle escaped him as he continued to examine the document. "Is something amusing?" Veronica asked sharply, her confident smile faltering slightly. Daniel's chuckle grew into full laughter, startling everyone in the room. He placed the document back on the table and removed his glasses, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "I apologize," he said, regaining his composure. "But this document is quite possibly the most amateur attempt at forgery I've seen in my 40 years of legal practice." The blood drained from Veronica's face. "What are you talking about? That amendment is perfectly legal. Harold signed it in front of witnesses." "Did he now?" Daniel asked, his tone suddenly steely despite his lingering smile. "That's fascinating considering Harold was in the hospital for gallbladder surgery on February 15th. I visited him there myself. He was under heavy sedation and certainly in no condition to be amending legal documents." Veronica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her family members shifted uncomfortably suddenly, very interested in their shoes or the ceiling tiles. Furthermore, Daniel continued, "This signature bears little resemblance to Harold's. The notary stamp is for someone whose license expired 3 years ago. And perhaps most damning of all, it references properties Harold sold in 2019 as if he still owned them." He shook his head almost admiringly. "If you're going to forge a legal document, Mrs. Ramirez, at least do your homework." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Veronica's sister grabbed her arm, whispering urgently in her ear. Veronica shook her off her face, contorted with anger and embarrassment. "This is absurd," she hissed. "Harold told me specifically he was changing the will. He promised me everything. Everything." Daniel ignored her outburst and retrieved a thick document from his portfolio. "Now, if we may proceed with the reading of the actual will, the one Harold signed and had properly witnessed and notarized 4 months ago." He cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Harold James Ramirez, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The legal preamble seemed endless as I sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Veronica had attempted to present a forged amendment to cut me out of Dad's will. She had lied boldly and publicly, which meant Dad hadn't betrayed me after all. Finally, Daniel reached the meat of the will. "To my beloved daughter, Luz Maria Ramirez, I leave 70% of my estate, including but not limited to my controlling interest in Ramirez Properties, Inc., the family home at 420 Oak Lane, all associated furnishings and personal items therein, with exceptions as noted below, and 70% of all financial accounts, investments, and insurance policies." I gasped audibly. 70%. I had expected perhaps a token inheritance, something Veronica couldn't legally prevent. But this was the majority of Dad's considerable estate. "To my wife, Veronica Elise Ramirez, I leave 30% of my estate, including the vacation property in Palm Springs, her personal vehicle, all jewelry purchased during our marriage, and 30% of financial accounts, investments, and insurance policies." Veronica's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is impossible," she sputtered. "He would never do this to me. Never." Daniel continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I make these distributions with full knowledge and awareness of events that have transpired in my marriage and family life. For the record, I wish to state that I have come to believe that my wife Veronica married me primarily for financial gain and has systematically attempted to alienate me from my daughter Luz through manipulation, lies, and interference with our communications." The room fell completely silent. Even Veronica seemed stunned into speechlessness. "I have collected evidence of this behavior over the past 2 years, including recorded conversations between Veronica and her attorney discussing plans to alter my will after my death, emails and text messages in which she deliberately failed to relay messages between myself and my daughter, and witness statements from household staff regarding her statements and actions." My mind was reeling. Dad had known. All this time he had known what Veronica was doing. Why hadn't he confronted her? Why hadn't he divorced her? Why hadn't he told me? As if answering my unspoken questions, Daniel continued reading. "I chose not to confront Veronica with this knowledge for several reasons. First, My doctor informed me 2 years ago that I had a heart condition that could significantly shorten my life. I feared that the stress of divorce proceedings might trigger a fatal episode before I could ensure Luz's inheritance was protected. Second, I believed that Veronica would attempt to destroy evidence or create false narratives if she knew I was aware of her manipulations. By maintaining the appearance of ignorance, I was able to gather conclusive proof of her actions and intentions. Tears streamed down my face freely now. Dad had been protecting me all along, working silently to ensure Veronica couldn't steal my inheritance or completely sever our relationship. He had sacrificed his own happiness and peace of mind for my future security. I deeply regret the pain my silence has caused, my daughter Daniel read, his voice softening. Luz, if you are hearing this, please know that I never stopped loving you. Every missed call, every canceled visit broke my heart. I kept every message you sent, every photo of your achievements. I was always so proud of you, even when Veronica convinced me you had forgotten me. I hope that one day you can forgive my weakness in allowing her to come between us and understand that my final actions were meant to make amends for years of failure as your father. I couldn't hold back my sobs now. The raw emotion in Dad's words, the revelation that he had never stopped loving me, that he had been trapped in a toxic marriage with a manipulative woman, overwhelmed me completely. Daniel paused, allowing me a moment to collect myself before continuing. In the event that Veronica attempts to contest this will or present falsified documents, I have instructed my attorney Daniel Williams to turn over all evidence I have collected to the appropriate authorities for potential criminal prosecution for fraud, attempted theft, and elder abuse. I would prefer this evidence remain private for the sake of all parties, but I will not allow my daughter to be robbed of her rightful inheritance even after my death. Veronica had gone completely pale. Her family members were edging away from her as if afraid her disgrace might be contagious. A copy of all evidence has been placed in a secure location known only to Daniel Williams and will be released only if Veronica fails to respect the terms of this will. I hope for everyone's sake that this will not be necessary. Daniel closed the document and looked around the room. That concludes the substantive portions of Harold's will. There are additional specific bequests to charities and friends, which I can address individually with the parties concerned. The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica's carefully constructed world had just collapsed around her. She had spent 15 years manipulating and scheming only to have her husband outmaneuver her from beyond the grave. "This is preposterous," she finally said, her voice shaking with rage. "Harold was not in his right mind when he wrote this. I'll contest it. I'll sue everyone in this room. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Daniel seemed entirely unfazed by her threats. "Mrs. Ramirez, I strongly advise against that course of action. The evidence Harold collected is quite compelling and would be extremely damaging if made public, not to mention the potential criminal charges." "What evidence?" she snapped. "He's bluffing. There is no evidence because I did nothing wrong." Daniel sighed and opened his briefcase again, retrieving a USB drive. "Harold anticipated your reaction. He asked me to play a small sample if you contested the will." He turned to his assistant. "Could you connect this to the display screen, please?" Moments later, Veronica's voice filled the room from the conference room speakers. "Listen, Jeffrey, I don't care what it takes. Once Harold is gone, we need that will to disappear. The real one. I've already prepared a replacement that leaves everything to me. His idiot daughter won't know the difference until it's too late." A male voice responded. "Veronica, what you're suggesting is highly illegal. Document fraud, inheritance theft." "Only if we get caught," Veronica's recorded voice replied with a laugh. "And we won't. Harold trusts me completely. He has no idea I've been intercepting Luz's calls and messages for years. He actually believes she's abandoned him. It's almost too easy." Daniel stopped the recording. Veronica sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and rage. "There are approximately 30 hours of similar recordings," Daniel said quietly. "Along with forged emails, text messages you deleted from Harold's phone, and statements from the housekeeper about instructions you gave to tell Luz, Her father was not available when she called. Veronica's sister stood up abruptly. "I think we should go," she said, not meeting anyone's eyes. One by one, Veronica's family members followed suit, abandoning her just as quickly as they had rallied around her when they thought she would be wealthy. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything I had just learned. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had been a prisoner in his own home, manipulated and isolated by the woman he trusted. And despite everything, he had found a way to protect me and expose the truth. Veronica recovered from her shock quickly, her face hardening into a mask of defiance. "This changes nothing," she spat, gathering her purse and standing. "I lived with Harold for 15 years. I was a devoted wife while his precious daughter was gallivanting around the world building her career. No judge will uphold this vindictive will." "I would advise against that course of action," Mrs. Ramirez Daniel repeated calmly. "I'm sure you would," she sneered. "You're probably getting a percentage of whatever she gets." She turned to me, eyes blazing with hatred. "Enjoy your victory, while it lasts, Luz. By the time my lawyers are finished, you'll be lucky to get a single penny of Harold's money." Something snapped inside me. After years of enduring her subtle jabs and manipulations, after discovering how she had systematically destroyed my relationship with my father, I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Why?" I asked, standing to face her. "Why did you hate me so much? What did I ever do to you except try to accept you for my father's sake?" Veronica laughed, a cold, brittle sound that held no humor. "You really don't get it, do you? From the moment I met Harold, you were the obstacle. Always, my lose this and my lose that. Always comparing me to your precious mother. I was never going to measure up to Saint Laura or her perfect daughter." "That's not true," I said, shocked by her venom. "Dad never compared you to Mom. He wanted to move forward to build something new." "You know nothing," she shouted, composure cracking completely. "Every night, he looked at her picture before bed. Every anniversary of her death, he would disappear for hours to visit her grave. Even after 10 years of marriage, I was still competing with a ghost and the living reminder of their perfect love." Her words hit me like physical blows. Dad had maintained that connection to Mom all those years, even while I thought he had moved on completely. He had never forgotten her, never stopped loving her. "So you punished him by cutting him off from me?" I asked, my voice growing stronger. "You isolated a grieving man from his only child out of jealousy." "I gave him a new life," Veronica insisted. "I made him successful, introduced him to the right people, elevated his business beyond what he could have achieved alone. All I asked was to be first in his life, not an eternal second to Laura's memory. When he couldn't give me that, I made sure he paid in other ways." The naked cruelty in her admission stunned everyone in the room. Daniel was carefully taking notes, clearly documenting her statements for potential legal proceedings. "My father loved you," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "He chose to stay with you even after he discovered your manipulations. He could have divorced you, exposed you, but he didn't. That has to count for something." "He stayed because he was weak," Veronica snapped. "Too afraid of scandal, too concerned about his heart condition. Not out of love. Or maybe he stayed because despite everything he believed in the commitment he made to you," I suggested. "The man I knew honored his promises even when it cost him dearly." Veronica waved her hand dismissively. "Save your sentimental garbage. This isn't over. I'm calling my lawyer immediately." "Before you do that," I said, suddenly feeling stronger than I had in years, "I'd like to offer you a deal." She paused, suspicion evident in her narrowed eyes. "What kind of deal?" "Walk away with the 30% Dad left you. No contests, no lawsuits, no public scandals. You get to keep your reputation and a significant inheritance. Fighting this will only drain both our resources and air a lot of dirty laundry you probably don't want public." "You think I care about scandal?" she scoffed. "I have nothing to lose." "Don't you?" I asked quietly. "Your social standing? Your friends in high society? The charity boards you sit on, how will they react when they hear recordings of you plotting to defraud your dying husband, when they learn you deliberately kept a father from his daughter, out of jealousy and greed? I could see uncertainty flicker across her face for the first time. Her social status meant everything to her. She had spent 15 years cultivating an image as the perfect wife, the generous philanthropist, the elegant socialite. That image would be shattered forever if Dad's evidence became public. 30% of Harold's estate is still substantial, Daniel added pragmatically. Certainly enough to live very comfortably for the rest of your life. And as Luz points out, without the public humiliation that would certainly result from contesting the will. Veronica's hand tightened on her purse strap as she visibly calculated her options. 40%, she countered. And I keep the house. The will stands as written, I said firmly. 30%. The vacation home in Palm Springs. Your personal belongings. Nothing more. And if I refuse, she challenged. Then I instruct Daniel to release every recording, every email, every piece of evidence to the police, the press, and every social contact in your address book, I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. Dad wanted to protect your dignity by keeping this private. I'm honoring that wish by offering you this chance to walk away. But I won't let you take what rightfully belongs to me or smear my father's memory with false claims about his mental state. Before Veronica could respond, the door to the conference room opened. A tall man in a crisp suit entered, nodding respectfully to Daniel. Perfect timing, Gregory, Daniel said. Luz, this is Gregory Barnes, the private investigator your father hired 2 years ago, when he first became suspicious of Veronica's behavior. Gregory nodded to me. Miss Ramirez, my condolences on your loss. Your father was a good man. What is this? Veronica demanded, looking increasingly cornered. Insurance, Daniel explained. Harold wanted to make absolutely certain that his wishes would be respected. Gregory has compiled a comprehensive report documenting not only your interference in Harold's relationship with Luz, but also some other concerning behaviors. Gregory opened a thin folder. Mrs. Ramirez, would you like me to detail my findings regarding your relationship with Joseph Mercer? The numerous hotel meetings, the joint bank account, the property purchased together in the Cayman Islands. The color drained from Veronica's face. You had me followed. Harold suspected you were unfaithful, Gregory said matter-of-factly. I confirmed his suspicions with substantial evidence. He chose not to confront you for reasons he explained in his will. I felt sick. Not only had Veronica manipulated and isolated my father, but she had betrayed him with another man. All while maintaining the facade of the devoted wife. You have 24 hours to decide, Veronica, I said, gathering my strength. Accept the terms of the will, or face the consequences of full disclosure. Your choice. For the first time since I'd known her, Veronica appeared genuinely defeated. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and she had no more cards to play. This isn't over, she said, but the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. She gathered her belongings and stormed out of the conference room, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Daniel looked at me with newfound respect. Your father would be proud of how you handled that. He worried you might be too kind-hearted to stand up to her if it came to this. I'm not the same naive girl she manipulated all those years, I said, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained away. And I won't let her take the last gift my father wanted to give me, his final effort to make things right between us. As I sat there processing everything that had happened, I realized that while I had lost my father, I had reclaimed the truth of our relationship. He had never stopped loving me. He had never chosen Veronica over me. And in his final act, he had ensured that I would know exactly how much I had meant to him, even when we were apart. The days following the will reading were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Daniel provided me with access to all the evidence Dad had collected, and each new piece of information was both vindicating and heartbreaking. I spent hours reading through intercepted emails I had sent to Dad that he never received, listening to phone messages that Veronica had deleted before he could hear them, and examining the meticulous notes Dad had kept documenting his growing suspicions. Why didn't he just divorce her? I asked Daniel, during one of our many meetings to transfer assets and handle legal paperwork. Once he knew what she was doing, why stay in such a toxic marriage? Daniel sighed, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. Your father confided in me about this. There were several factors. His heart condition was very real, and his doctor had warned that extreme stress could trigger a fatal episode. A contentious divorce from someone as vindictive as Veronica would certainly qualify as extreme stress. He risked his happiness to preserve his health, I murmured, the irony not lost on me. There was more to it, Daniel continued. Harold felt responsible for Veronica in some ways. He told me once that he believed he had rushed into marriage with her while still grieving your mother, that perhaps he had used Veronica as a distraction from his pain. He felt that gave him a certain obligation to her despite her behavior. That sounds like Dad, I said with a sad smile. Always taking responsibility even for others' actions. And finally, Daniel added gently, he was afraid of losing his connection to you completely. Veronica had convinced him for years that you were distant by choice, too busy with your own life to care about him. He feared that if he divorced her and the truth came out about how she had manipulated both of you, you might never forgive him for being so blind, for allowing her to damage your relationship. It was only in the last 2 years, as he gathered evidence, that he began to understand the full extent of her interference. The thought of Dad suffering silently, torn between his health concerns, his misplaced sense of obligation to Veronica, and his fear of losing me forever, was almost unbearable. He had been trapped in a prison of Veronica's making, with walls reinforced by his own sense of duty and fear. Did he suffer, Daniel? I asked, needing to know. In his marriage, was he unhappy all those years? Daniel considered this carefully. Not all the time, I don't think. In the early years before he became suspicious, there were periods of contentment. Harold was skilled at finding joy where he could. But in these last few years, once he began to see Veronica clearly, yes, I believe he suffered greatly. The knowledge that she had systematically destroyed his relationship with you weighed on him enormously. This painful truth settled over me like a physical weight. Dad had endured years of quiet misery, all while meticulously building a case to ensure that Veronica couldn't continue her manipulation after his death. His final act of love had been to protect me from her greed and malice, even when he no longer could. As I went through Dad's personal effects in the house that was now legally mine, I discovered a locked drawer in his study desk. Daniel provided the key, explaining that Dad had given it to him with instructions to pass it to me after the will was settled. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, spanning the 15 years of his marriage to Veronica. Letters he had written but never sent. Some were responses to major life events, congratulating me on job promotions or expressing concern during challenging times. Others were simply updates on his life, things he wished he could tell me during our increasingly rare and strained phone calls. All of them expressed his unwavering love and pride in me. One letter, dated shortly after I had moved abroad for work, hit me particularly hard. My dearest Luz, I heard about your international promotion today. Not from you, which breaks my heart, but from Thomas, who saw the announcement in the business section. I wonder if you tried to tell me and somehow I missed your call, or if you've simply given up trying to share your life with me. Either possibility fills me with sadness. I am so incredibly proud of you, my brilliant girl. You've built a career more impressive than I could have imagined, all through your own talent and determination. Your mother would be bursting with pride if she could see you now. I miss you more than words can express. The house feels empty without your visits, without your laughter. I find myself walking past your old room now, Veronica's meditation space, and remembering how you used to sit at the window seat reading for hours. Something isn't right in my life, Luz. I can't quite put my finger on what's changed, but I feel increasingly isolated. Veronica says you're too busy for family now that adult children naturally drift away from their parents. Perhaps she's right, but the father in me refuses to believe we could have lost our bond so completely in such a short time. I will keep this letter with the others. Perhaps someday you'll read them and understand that not a day went by when I didn't think of you, miss you, love you. All my love always, Dad. I sobbed as I read each letter, mourning the years we had lost to Veronica's manipulation, the relationship that had been stolen from us. But alongside the grief was a profound sense of healing. Dad had never stopped loving me. He had never been disappointed in me or felt abandoned by me. The doubts that had plagued me for years were finally laid to rest. 24 hours after the will reading, Daniel received word from Veronica's new attorney. She would accept the terms of the will without contest in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement preventing the public release of any evidence Harold had collected. I agreed immediately. Despite everything she had done, dragging Veronica's sins into the public eye would not bring Dad back or heal our lost years. When I met with her to sign the final paperwork, Veronica was a shadow of her former confident self. She avoided my eyes as we sat across from each other in Daniel's office, signing document after document to formalize our agreement. As she rose to leave, I finally spoke directly to her. I need to understand something, Veronica. Was any of it real? Did you ever love my father at all? She paused, her hand on the doorknob, back still turned to me. For a moment, I thought she would leave without answering. I loved the life he gave me, she finally said, voice barely above a whisper. The status, the security, the respect that came with being Mrs. Harold Ramirez. Was that love I don't know anymore? She left without another word, walking out of my life as suddenly as she had entered it 15 years earlier. I never saw her again. According to Daniel, she sold the Palm Springs house, liquidated her portion of the assets, and moved abroad. Sometimes I wonder if she found whatever it was she had been so desperately seeking in her marriage to Dad, the thing that drove her to such manipulative extremes. Mostly, though, I focus on rebuilding my own life. In the weeks that followed, I met with Dad's business associates, learning about the company he had built and making plans for its future. Many of them shared stories about Dad. I had never heard moments of generosity and integrity that had gone unmentioned. Several admitted that they had noticed the change in him over the years of his marriage to Veronica, how he had become more withdrawn, less like the vibrant man they had known. He lit up whenever he mentioned you, though, his vice president told me over coffee. Even in recent years, when he thought you were drifting apart, just saying your name brought a smile to his face. Slowly, I began to piece together a more complete picture of my father's life during our years of separation. The man who had maintained his love for my mother despite remarrying. The businessman who had never compromised his ethics, despite pressure from Veronica to cut corners for greater profits. The father who had sacrificed his own happiness to protect his daughter's future. I also discovered through conversations with household staff who had been too afraid of Veronica to speak up while Dad was alive, just how many times I had allegedly canceled visits at the last minute or declined invitations to family events, none of which I had ever actually received. The web of lies Veronica had spun was more extensive than even Dad had uncovered. Your father suspected something wasn't right, Elena, the longtime housekeeper told me tearfully. He would ask me sometimes if I had seen any messages from you, if perhaps you had called when he was out. I was too afraid of Mrs. Ramirez to tell him the truth, that I had seen her delete your messages from his phone, that I had heard her tell you he was too busy to speak when he was sitting right in the next room asking who was calling. I am so sorry, Miss Luz. I should have been braver. I couldn't bring myself to blame Elena or any of the other staff. Veronica had wielded her power in the household with an iron fist, and their livelihoods had depended on her goodwill. Instead, I focused on moving forward, on honoring Dad's memory by preserving the best parts of his legacy. 6 months after that fateful day in the lawyer's office, I stood at the window of what had once been Dad's study and was now mine. The room had been transformed, the cold, impersonal decor Veronica had imposed, replaced with warm colors and comfortable furnishings that reminded me of our family home before Mom died. Photos of both my parents now hung on the walls, no longer hidden away in drawers or relegated to storage. Ramirez Properties was thriving under my leadership with guidance from Dad's trusted executives and my own marketing expertise. I had implemented several initiatives Dad had outlined in his notes, but never pursued, including an affordable housing division that created homes for lower-income families without sacrificing quality or design. The most meaningful project, however, was the Harold and Laura Ramirez Foundation. established with a significant portion of my inheritance. The foundation provided scholarships for children who had lost parents, funded grief counseling programs, and supported research into early detection of heart disease. It was my way of ensuring that my parents' legacy would touch lives far beyond our immediate circle, that the love they had shared would continue to create positive change in the world. The process of healing from the years of separation and manipulation had not been easy. I had worked with a therapist to process my complicated grief, the anger at Veronica, the sadness for lost time with Dad, and the guilt I still sometimes felt for not somehow breaking through the barriers she had created. Rationally, I knew there was nothing more I could have done, but emotions rarely follow rational paths. In Dad's desk, I had found his journal from the last 2 years of his life, documenting his growing awareness of Veronica's manipulations and his careful plans to protect me. One entry particularly stood out. I realize today that I have been a coward. I have allowed fear to dictate my actions, fear of confrontation, fear for my health, fear of losing Luz completely if she knew how badly I had failed her as a father. But there is a different kind of courage than direct confrontation. There is the courage to plan to be patient, to lay groundwork that may not bear fruit until after I'm gone. This is the courage I must find now for Luz's sake. I may not have the time or strength to repair our relationship in life, but I can ensure that she knows the truth after I'm gone, that she receives the inheritance that is rightfully hers, that Veronica cannot continue to harm her once I am no longer here to serve as a buffer. This will be my final act of love as her father. Those words had brought me both comfort and sorrow. Comfort in knowing that Dad had never stopped fighting for me in his own quiet way. Sorrow that he had felt so trapped, so limited in his options to reach out to me directly. The most difficult lesson I had to learn was forgiveness, not of Veronica, whom I may never truly forgive, but of myself and my father. I had to forgive myself for the doubts I had harbored, the times I had given up trying to reach Dad, assuming he simply didn't prioritize our relationship. And I had to forgive Dad for not finding a way to break free of Veronica's influence sooner, for the years we had lost that could never be reclaimed. That forgiveness came gradually as I immersed myself in Dad's letters and journals, as I spoke with people who had known him during those years, as I came to understand the impossible situation he had found himself in. He had made mistakes, certainly, but he had done the best he could with the knowledge and strength he possessed at the time. And in the end, he had found a way to make things right, even if he didn't live to see the results. As I sorted through the last of Dad's personal items, one evening I came across a small wooden box I had never seen before. Inside was Mom's wedding ring, which I had assumed was buried with her, and a note in Dad's handwriting. "For Luz, when the time is right. Your mother wanted you to have this to remember that true love persists beyond separation, beyond even death. I have kept it safe all these years, a reminder of what real partnership looks like. May you find someone who loves you as completely as your mother and I loved each other, someone who brings light to your life as you brought light to ours from the moment you were born." Tears blurred my vision as I slipped the ring onto my finger. It was too big, but I would have it resized. For now, I simply needed to feel that connection to both of them, to the love that had created and shaped me. The most profound lesson I took from this painful journey was about the nature of love itself. True love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in the careful planning of a father trying to protect his child's future. It doesn't always fight openly. Sometimes it works quietly behind the scenes, gathering evidence, building safeguards. Love persists even when communication fails, even when years pass without proper connection, even when manipulative forces try to sever its bonds. Dad's love had survived 15 years of Veronica's systematic attempts to destroy it. It had survived misunderstandings, distance, and doubt. It had found a way to reach me even after his death, to tell me everything he had been unable to express in life. And my love for him had survived too, through all the hurt and confusion, the missed calls and declined invitations that never actually occurred. Deep down, I had never stopped being that little girl who thought her dad hung the moon and stars, who trusted in his love even when all evidence seemed to point to its absence. No will, no legal document could ever fully capture the true inheritance my father left me. The knowledge that I was loved unconditionally, that I was worth fighting for, that no manipulation or deceit could ultimately sever the bond between parent and child if that love was genuine. As I sit here in his study, surrounded by the evidence of both his life and his love, I feel his presence more strongly than I have since he died. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the enduring impact of his character on my own, the values he instilled that helped me stand up to Veronica, the strength he nurtured that allows me to carry on his legacy while building my own. No inheritance of money or property could ever match the true gift he gave me. The certainty that I was loved always, even when that love was obscured by the machinations of someone who could never understand its power or depth. Have you ever experienced someone trying to come between you and a loved one? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more tales of family betrayal and ultimate redemption. Share this with someone who might be struggling with family relationships to remind them that sometimes love works in ways we can't immediately see. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, no manipulator can truly destroy love that's built on a foundation of truth and genuine connection.